Al Chaya Part 2. We started that song yesterday. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you on a Thursday evening. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we're getting closer and closer to Shabbos? Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Joshua in Florida, Nancy in North Carolina, Tom in PA, Hannah in New York, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Paula in Chicago, Gwen in Michigan, Melissa in New York, John in Maine, PK in Colorado, James in Indianapolis, Guy in Ohio, Renee in Indiana, Miriam in Colorado, Rick in Chicago, David in Indiana, John, Scotland in the house. I love it. You're studying deep in the night. Huge zechus, a huge merit for you for that. Bill in mid-Missouri and Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. I did just a quick exchange late this afternoon with my friend Joel. I shared with you, it's just I guess now it's been 2-3 months since it happened, that inexplicable tragedy when his wife, Leora, young, beautiful, mother of 5, taken from this world in a car accident. And I checked in with Joel, how are you doing? And he told me he's been reading a book by Rabbi David Asher called Living Emunah, Living Faith, that's really helping him to get through this. So I want to dedicate today's learning to her, to her beautiful neshama, her soul. So she is Leora Tova Bas Rachamim. And what Joel was reading about in this book is this idea, if you read, there are many stories that you can find online. We've shared more than a few on Accidental Talmudist. My story of how I became the accidental Talmudist is an example of hashgacha pratis, right? Divine providence, seeming incredible coincidences, sort of God going out of his way to make something happen. In my case, to put book 1 of the Talmud in my hands on day 1 of the Daf Yomi cycle. And, here we are all these years later, learning together every day. It never would have happened but for that. And sometimes much more important coincidences like that save lives, right? That say incredible, just incredible coincidences that end up saving a life. The person, who was delayed going to the airport by the weirdest, most aggravating circumstance, and then, something terrible happened to that airplane, etc. Amazing stories that save people's lives. So then if you're the bereaved, who lost somebody so dear to you, you might ask, well, why didn't such a miracle happen to my loved one? Why was she taken from this world? Why was he taken from this world? Why didn't God intervene with divine providence and send the hashgacha pratis my way? So Joel was telling me that he learned from this book that those kinds of stories can even strengthen the faith and give comfort to somebody in his position, where God didn't intervene and she was taken tragically young, and at such a young age with children between a young baby and 11 years of age. So says Joel, learning from this book, God could have intervened. It's the easiest thing for God to do. God's power is unlimited. He knows everything, sees everything, can change anything that he wants. So he didn't. She wasn't saved from that horrific accident because God had a purpose for her. Her soul was needed in the world of souls. For whatever God's reason that Joel trusts God, and her short life came to an end at what was the right time for God and for her. And we can't understand it in this world. And I would not offer, this explanation to somebody in the midst of their grief. They have to come to it themselves. But I'm sharing with you what Joel shared with me and what gives him comfort. She lived a beautiful, albeit short life, and she was taken for a reason. God could have easily intervened, but she was taken for a reason. And thank God we all are souls. We are eternal beings. We're only in this world for a short time. And some of us are blessed to live to 120 years of age and some much less. But compared to our eternal lives, whatever time we had here was short. And not everybody makes the most of it. But Joel is confident that Leora did, and that there was a reason for her going, and that they'll be reunited in the world of souls. And that gives him strength, and perhaps it can give someone else strength as well. So we dedicate our learning today to Leora Tova Bas Rachamim. Okay, we are on page 23 here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 2. And today, concluding our discussion of Mishnah number 4 and moving into Mishnah number 5. So Mishnah number 4 explains that, when does Yibum apply, levirate marriage? This man died before he was married but didn't have children, and he has a surviving brother, and then the brother has an obligation to marry the widow or perform chalitza with her. But that only applies if the man was childless. And this Mishnah says that any kind of child counts as his, if he has a child of any kind, it counts as his child, even if that child was fathered through an illegitimate relationship, and that child was a mamzer, who has his own, sort of very sad restrictions placed on him. It's going to be very limited who in the Jewish community he can marry. But even though that union was illegitimate, this man cheated on his wife and had an affair with another married Jewish woman, horrific circumstances, but that child counts, and so his wife, the widow, is excused from Yibum or Chalitza. Likewise, any brother counts. The brother could be a mamzer produced by the husband's father, right? So it's his brother, his half brother probably, and yet to him would fall the obligation of Yibum. Pursuant to this discussion in the Gemara, we encountered this dispute between the rabbis and Rabbi Yosei, that if a man unwittingly marries his sister, then, he's going to have to bring a sin offering if the temple is standing. But the rabbis say he brings 2 sin offerings. Now, this is unwitting, right? He didn't know, she didn't know, he didn't know that they were brother and sister. Maybe one of them was given up for adoption and they learned later, one of those kinds of situations. But at any rate, they discover that they were brother and sister. Obviously, they must part company, but they were married, for that brief time. They had relations, and they're going to bring a sin offering for that. If they did it on purpose, then the sin offering is not applicable. This is only when you did it accidentally, unwittingly. But say the rabbis, he brings 2 sin offerings. Why? Because he violated 2 prohibitions that are stated in the Torah. You will not marry your sister, and you will not marry the daughter of your father's wife. And Rabbi Yosei says, well, it's the same thing. The Torah didn't mean to create 2 prohibitions that he's violating, when obviously your sister is the daughter of your father, right? The daughter of your father's wife. Hopefully not, your full sister, but it could even be that. So says Rabbi Yosei, 1 sin offering, and this argument has been going, and so at the end of the daf yesterday, we learned that Rava raised a contradiction related to this dispute. In one verse, it is written, "The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter you shall not uncover," Leviticus 18:10, which implies consequently that her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter is permitted. And it is written elsewhere, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. You shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter," which states explicitly that her son's daughter and daughter's daughter are prohibited. So how do we reconcile these texts? And we continue today. We're at the bottom of page 22b. So here it is referring to a daughter by a woman whom the man raped, in which case he is allowed to marry her daughter, provided she is not also his daughter. Obviously, this sounds terrible and uncomfortable. What the hell are you talking about? The last thing this family wants is to be in any way involved with this man who committed rape. Obviously. But what we're talking about is that when he raped this woman and created, consequences from that, a consequence that was not created is that he married her. He didn't marry her when he raped her. So therefore, technically, he could marry, her daughter from some other union that is not his daughter, because you're prohibited to marry a woman and her daughter, but this woman never became his wife, and that's why the daughter remains eligible. Would she ever marry the man who raped her mother? No, of course not. But just technically, there's eligibility for that. So there it is referring to a woman whom one married, in which case it is forbidden to marry her daughter under any circumstances. And this is how Rav is reconciling those two passages that seem to be contradictory. However, even in a case where one's father raped a woman, one is still permitted to marry the woman's daughter by another man. If one's father had a daughter with this woman, one would be prohibited from having a relationship with that daughter, as she is his paternal half-sister. But, if she has no relationship to him, if it's more like a Marsha and Greg Brady situation, they're not technically prohibited to each other. Now we're on 23a. Now the Gemara raises a challenge and say that the verse, the daughter of your father's wife, who's prohibited to a man, comes to exclude women who were forbidden, as they are liable for violating prohibitions, but were nevertheless married to his father, such as a mamzeret, right? So a mamzeret is a woman who's a mamzer. So she's the daughter of an illicit union between a Jewish man and a Jewish woman who was not his wife. In fact, she was married to some other man. They had an affair. They had a child, a daughter. And then that woman, a mamzeret, so a female mamzer or a mamzer, are not allowed by the Torah law to marry Jews unless that other Jew is also a mamzer. So if the father married this mamzeret, that they violated a prohibition. They weren't allowed to get married, but they did. So then the offspring of that union, right, what is going to be the consequence to that? So say that the daughter of your father's wife comes to exclude women who were forbidden, as they are liable for violating prohibitions, but were nevertheless married to his father, like a mamzeret. If so, his sister from such a union would not be considered his sister. And Rav Papa said betrothal comes into effect with women who are forbidden, and one would be liable for violating prohibitions despite the fact that union with them is forbidden, and so she is called the wife of your father. And this is derived from the verse in which it is written, if a man has two wives, the one beloved and the other hated. Deuteronomy 21:15. Now, that's normally understood when we look at the simple meaning of that verse in Deuteronomy, that, if a man in his youth had, a first marriage that went bad, okay, and then he has another marriage that's really the love of his life, and he had his firstborn comes from this woman who ends up, just being a thorn in his side. They have a terrible relationship. And then the woman who really is his soulmate and his life partner for all the years, and he has a bunch of children with her, so he might be tempted to not, treat his firstborn as a firstborn is intended to be treated by the Torah, meaning he is the primary heir and he receives a double portion of whatever the inheritance is because he is the child of his first vigor, as is said elsewhere in the Torah. Now that's what we normally learn in this verse about when it says if a man has two wives, the one beloved and the other hated. Now, in this Gemara, says Rav Papa, is there one who is loved by the omnipresent and one who is hated by the omnipresent? Is God going to love one and hate the other? Now you would think they're talking about the husband. But since it says a man has two wives, the one beloved and the other hated, it doesn't say who loves them and who hates them. So Rav Papa interprets like this. Is one of these wives going to be loved by God and the other hated by God? Obviously not. Rather, beloved means that her marriage is beloved, as it was permitted for her to be married in accordance with Jewish law. And hated means that her marriage is hated because it was not permitted for her to be married according to halacha. For example, the man married a mamzer who was prohibited to him, but he married her anyway. And the merciful one states, if a man has two wives, meaning that both are considered to be married. He shouldn't have married her, but he did. So she's considered his wife, and the children are the children of a marriage for purposes of evaluating whether yibum is going to apply or not. Now the Gemara asks, say that this verse comes to exclude a union between one's father and a woman that is forbidden to him, as they are liable to receive karis, right? So it's a karis-bearing penalty. Karis is death at the hands of the heavenly court, a heavy penalty, but not considered as heavy as a capital offense that a rabbinical court would execute. In other words, you don't execute people who commit karis-bearing penalties, but you say God will, revisit this. Perhaps if you make a complete atonement, you may be able to overcome that karis penalty, but you better take it seriously and make that atonement, because perhaps you won't. So now, since they both violated a karis-bearing prohibition, and that since betrothal does not come into effect with her, say that there is no marriage bond, right? They weren't married. They're not allowed to get married. So how can you say that they were married, and therefore they should be excluded for the purposes of yibum? Perhaps a sister born of such a woman would not be prohibited as the daughter of one's father's wife, right? And so now they're actually evaluating. We're still on this question of do you owe one offering or two sin offerings if you sleep with this woman who is your sister? Okay, but is she really your sister? You did it unwittingly, but is she really your sister if she's actually a mamzeret who was born of an illegal union that your father entered into? So they're still arguing about that. So Rava said, the verse states, the nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or born outside. Leviticus 18:9. And this includes all daughters, whether from a woman whom the sages tell your father, maintain her within your home, meaning a legitimate marriage, or whether the sages tell your father, she is a woman who is forbidden to him, and therefore send her out of your home. She's a mamzer, she's prohibited to you, you're not allowed to be married to her. Or maybe you're a priest and you married a divorced woman. She's not permitted to you, so you're going to have to end that marriage. And the merciful one states that nevertheless, she is your sister, even the daughter of a woman who was forbidden to your father, such that both parties are liable to receive karis, is still called your sister, says Rava. And the Gemara asks, say that whether the sages say to your father, maintain her, or whether they say to your father, send her out, and the merciful one states that she is your sister, so this comes to include the additional cases of his sister from a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman. Okay, so now your father had an affair with a Jewish woman who was prohibited to him. That was an illegitimate union, but nevertheless, she is your sister. And if you sleep with her, you owe two sin offerings, right? One for your sister and one for your father's wife's daughter. Now they're asking, so even if it's illegitimate, she's still considered your sister for certain halakhic purposes. Okay. So what about if your father slept with a Canaanite slave who's a non-Jew, but is a slave to a Jewish owner? Obviously doesn't exist anymore, hasn't in thousands of years, but did 2,000 years ago. Or what does exist now, sadly, is that the Jewish man fathered a daughter with a Gentile woman. Now, listen. We're studying the Talmud here. These are absolutely traditional, legal, halakhic Jewish views. We're just teaching what it says here, right? So a union to a non-Jewish woman is just illegal under Jewish law. Obviously, you can go and, people can fall in love and get married by a justice of the peace, and that's going to be a recognized marriage in the United States of America or any other country. But under Jewish law, it's an absolutely illegitimate union, and the Torah says so, and the Bible definitely says so, as we will see. So, for the purposes of this question of if your father, had an affair with a non-Jewish woman and produced a daughter, from that union, is she considered your sister, such that if you slept with her, would you owe 2 sin offerings? One because she's your father's wife's daughter, and another because she's your sister. The daughter. And so say that it comes to include the additional cases of his sister from a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman. Yes, you should include them, and you would owe that sin offering. But the Gemara rejects this. The verse states, the daughter of your father's wife. And this means whoever can enter into a marriage bond with your father. And this excludes his sister from a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman with whom no marital bond is possible under Jewish law. Now the Gemara asks, since the verse rendering his sister forbidden both includes and excludes cases, what did you see as a reason to include a daughter from a woman who is forbidden and both parties are liable to receive charis, meaning both parties are Jewish but prohibited to each other, and to exclude the daughter of a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman? And the Gemara answers, it stands to reason that those relationships that are forbidden, because they render both parties liable to receive charis, should be included, since in general, betrothal can come into effect with them. This is because although the woman is forbidden to his father, she is nevertheless permitted to other Jewish men. But the Gentile woman is not permitted to any Jewish man. And the Gemara rejects this reasoning. On the contrary, it should include a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman, as if she converts and becomes a Jewish woman, then betrothal can come into effect with the father himself and she'd be entirely permitted to him. And the Gemara answers, when she converts, she is considered like a different body. She's a new person. Then she's no longer a Gentile. But while she's a Gentile, there's no possibility of marital relations with her. Therefore, the verse excludes her. If your father a woman with this non-Jewish woman, she is not considered your sister. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the rabbis who infer a different matter from the verse, your father's wife's nakedness, from where do they derive the law to exclude one sister from a Canaanite maidservant or a Gentile woman? And the Gemara answers, they derive it from that which was said with regard to a Canaanite maidservant who was married to a Hebrew slave. The wife and her children shall be her masters. Exodus 21:4. And from here they learn that the lineage of the maidservant's children is connected only to their mother and not at all connected to their Jewish father. Right? So that comes up in that case, which is specified in the Torah, where perhaps you had a Jewish man who had become a slave because of his debts, right? And he had to enter indentured servitude, and he was legally a slave, for 6 years, right? And then at the end of that period, he goes out of slavery. But while he's a slave, so he fathers a child with the Canaanite slave of his master. Now, he could make a choice at the end of his enslavement to remain a slave so that he can remain with this family, this woman and child with whom he formed a family while he was a slave. But in order to do that, it's that ritual where he puts his ear against the doorpost of the house, and they actually, hammer like some kind of a spike through his ear into the doorpost, signaling that this man is chosen to be a slave forever. There actually is a mechanism for that. So perhaps some people made that choice in order, because not only because it was, he wanted to stay with the family, and it's somehow better for him to be in the household, probably where he was being treated rather well, than to go out in the world where he wasn't able to function before, and that's what led to his enslavement. So it's kind of in that realm that this law was given. But in the course of that law, the way it's worded in the Torah is that the child born to that Canaanite maidservant travels with her. What they don't do is separate a child from its mother. So if this Hebrew slave fathered a child with that woman and then he goes out of slavery, well, the child remains with the mother and is considered the mother's child and not the father's, right? So so under this reasoning, if a Jewish man produces a child with this non-Jewish woman, right? So then it's her child, not his. It's not considered his child because he never should have been with that woman. Right? So the Hebrew slave, the wife and her children shall be her masters. And from here, meaning the owner, but through the owner, her, the maidservant. From here they learn that the lineage of a maidservant's children is connected only to their mother and not at all connected to their Jewish father. And the Gemara asks, and why does Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, not learn this from here? And the Gemara responds, one verse was necessary to teach the case of a Canaanite maidservant, and one verse was necessary to teach the case of a Gentile woman, as they are different cases. Both times, it's a non-Jewish woman with whom this man might have fathered a child that's not going to be considered his child, but there's still different outcomes. And both verses are necessary, as if the Torah taught us only about a Canaanite maidservant. One could say she is excluded only because she does not have a pedigree, since the Torah ascribes no family relationships to maidservants, but with regard to a Gentile woman who does have a pedigree, say no. It was therefore necessary to say that one's daughter by a Gentile woman does not have the legal status of a daughter. What does this mean, a pedigree? The question of a pedigree here relates to her paternal lineage. A child's status does not necessarily follow his father's lineage, right? I'm a Levite because my father was a Levite. Somebody who is a Cohen is a Cohen because his father was a Cohen. And when the rest of the tribes were known, you could be a Reubenite or a Danite or a Zebulonite because your father was a member of one of those tribes. However, are you a Jew or are you not a Jew? That's if your mother was Jewish, you're a Jew. And if your mother was not Jewish, you're not a Jew. You could become a Jew, but you're not born a Jew. So this question of pedigree relates to the paternal lineage. For some realms of halacha, lineage follows the mother's family. Consequently, even when it is certain who the biological father is, the law does not necessarily consider the child a part of the father's family. The conclusion of the Talmudic discussion here, that the law takes paternal lineage into account, is not agreed upon by all. In the Jerusalem Talmud, there is a dispute over whether Gentiles follow their father's family lineage or not. So conversely, if it would teach us only the case of a Gentile woman, one might say that this is because she does not have any connection with the mitzvahs. She's not obligated in any Torah mitzvahs. The 7 mitzvahs that apply to all the children of Noah, right? The Noahide commandments, those apply to all human beings. She's obligated in those. But all the rest of the mitzvahs that apply to Jews, she's not obligated in them. She has no reason to be obligated in them. She's not Jewish. But the Canaanite maidservant, right, the Canaanite slave of a Jewish owner, when this was practiced in ancient times, she has a connection with the mitzvahs, as she is obligated to observe the prohibitions in the same way as Jewish women. While she was living in the household of a Jewish man, she actually is obligated in mitzvahs, not because she's Jewish, but because she's a slave of a Jewish owner and living in a Jewish household. And so she was obligated to observe the prohibitions in the same way as Jewish women. So therefore, say no, her children should be considered children of their Jewish father. Therefore, this additional proof was necessary to tell you that in both cases, if this man fathered a child by a non-Jewish woman or the Canaanite slave of a Jewish owner, that child is not considered his child and doesn't trigger this prohibition against being with your sister. Now the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of the rabbis, we found a source that the children of a Canaanite maidservant are not considered the children of their Jewish father. But from where do we derive that children born to a Jewish father by a Gentile woman are not considered his children? And if you say, let us derive it from the case of the Canaanite maidservant, it has already been shown that these are both necessary and one cannot be derived from the other. So what is the proof that a Jewish man's child by a non-Jewish woman is not considered his child under Jewish law? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. The verse states, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter you shall not give unto his son, nor his daughter shall you take unto your son, for he will turn away your son from following me. And this teaches that your son, born from a Jewish woman, is called your son, but your son born from a Gentile woman is not called your son, but her son. The verse teaches that since the son of a Gentile woman is her son alone, he is not considered related at all to his Jewish father. God was pretty explicit about this. Jewish men have to marry Jewish women. Why? Because if they don't, they will end up going away from the covenant between God and the Jewish people, which is what usually happens. Interesting note here from Rav Steinsaltz. This law appears to be explicit in verses from the book of Ezra. We have broken faith with our God and have married foreign women of the peoples of the land. Now, therefore, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all such wives and such as are born of them. Ezra 10, verses 2 and 3. So if it's explicit in the Bible, in Ezra, why were they looking for that same proof in the Torah? Well, because the Gemara sought to find a source for this law from the Torah itself and not just in the books of the prophets or the writings. Now, Ravina said, conclude from here that the son of your daughter by a Gentile father is nevertheless called your son, i.e. grandson. And the Gemara asks, shall we say that Ravina holds that if a Gentile or slave engaged in intercourse with a Jewish woman, the offspring is of unflawed lineage? And the Gemara answers, there's no conclusive proof from here because granted, she is not a mamzer, but nevertheless, she is still not of unflawed lineage. Rather, she is called a Jew who is unfit to marry into the priesthood. Right? So if this Jewish woman had a child by a Gentile, the child is a Jew, but the lineage is flawed, and so he's only prohibited to marry a Cohen. If a Cohen married this Jew by a non-Jewish father, he would be prohibited from serving in the temple as a priest. But in all other respects, any child of a Jewish woman is a Jew and can freely marry into the Jewish people, just not a priest. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to Rabbi Shimon's reasoning, was this verse not written in relation to the 7 nations who inhabited the land of Canaan when Joshua entered the land of Israel, but not with regard to other nations? And the Gemara responds that the words, he will turn away, comes to include all those who would turn one's grandson away from God. In other words, any Gentile. This is why a Jewish man cannot marry a non-Jewish woman, and vice versa. It should be the same. The Gemara asks, this works out well for Rabbi Shimon, although, a Jewish woman should not marry a non-Jewish man, but okay, the child is a Jew. But if a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman, it really triggers this prohibition, and that's why that child is not a Jew and is not even considered under Jewish law his child. The Gemara asks, this works out well for Rabbi Shimon, who interprets the rationale behind the mitzvah in the verse and draws halakhic conclusions based on that interpretation. Although the verse is stated with regard to the 7 nations, the reason for the verse applies to all Gentile nations. However, according to the opinion of the rabbis, who do not draw inferences from the rationale of the verse to apply this ruling to all other nations, from where do they derive this law? And the Gemara answers, who is the Tana who disagrees with Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda? It is Rabbi Shimon, who applies the rationale of the verse to all other nations. And so the law, right, just where did it end up from this discussion? The halacha, if a Gentile or a slave had relations with a Jewish woman and she gave birth to a child, that child is a Jew and is eligible to enter into the congregation. If that offspring is a daughter, then she is unfit to marry a priest, but is otherwise fit to enter the congregation. Okay. Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 2. In the case of one who betrothed one of 2 sisters and does not know which of them he betrothed, so that both are forbidden to him, he gives a bill of divorce to this one and a bill of divorce to that one due to the uncertainty. Recall that betrothal in Jewish law is not like engagement in secular culture. In secular culture, you get engaged, you give a ring, later you change your mind, you break off the engagement, you go your separate ways, have a good life. But under betrothal, the laws of betrothal, you may not have consummated that marriage, you may not have stood under the chuppah yet, but you have become prohibited to all other people as soon as you are betrothed. And even if you never consummate that union, if you decide to break it off, you must go through the divorce process and give the get, the bill of divorce. Now, how could you get betrothed and then forget who you were betrothed to? Well, it could happen if that betrothal happened at a young age. There was a party and there were two young girls, they were twins, and they said, well, when they grow up, your young son and my young daughter will get married. The kids weren't even really paying attention, but the dads betrothed them. That certainly happened in the ancient world. And so then later, when they got older, they weren't sure who got betrothed to who. Now, that's a real mess, because if you then marry the wrong one, not the one that you were betrothed to, and they were sisters, for example, so now you would have married one and her sister, definitely a violation. Or, are we talking about sisters here? Yeah, and we're talking about sisters. So, there's the simplest case why this is a big problem. So he has to give a bill of divorce to both of them. Now, if the man who had betrothed one of these women died before he could give that bill of divorce, and he had one brother, so now that brother comes before, the Yevama for Yibum. But who is his Yevama? Who is the widow of that betrothal? No one knows. They're not sure. So what does he do? If he had one brother, that brother performs chalitza with both of them to be sure that it's covered. One of those chalitzas is meaningless. The other one is effective. But this way, both are for certain released from that levirate bond. This is because he does not know which woman is his Yevama and which is forbidden to him as the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. Now, if the man who betrothed one of these women had two brothers, okay, so one of them performs chalitza with one of the sisters, but he may not enter into yibum with her due to the possibility that she is the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. And the other one takes the other brother can take the other sister in yibum if he so desires. If the two brothers married the two sisters before consulting the court does not remove them from their marriage, and they are permitted to remain married. And the couple who performed yibum second was even permitted to do so, since there was no longer any doubt about the levirate bond. Furthermore, in the case of two unrelated men who betrothed two sisters, if this one does not know which sister he betrothed, and that one does not know which sister he betrothed, this one gives two bills of divorce, one to each of the women, and that one gives two bills of divorce, one to each of the women. And if the two men died before they gave these bills of divorce, and this one had a brother and that one had a brother, then this brother performs chalitza with both of them, and that brother performs chalitza with both of them because of all the uncertainty that is involved in this case. If this one had one brother and that one had two brothers, the single brother performs chalitza with both of the women. And of the two brothers, one performs chalitza and one may perform yibum if he desires. If they marry the sisters before consulting the court does not remove them from the marriage, and they are not told to divorce them. If this one had two brothers and that one had two brothers, the brother of this one performs chalitza with one sister, and the brother of that one performs chalitza with one sister, and the brother of this one who performed chalitza may take the woman who performed chalitza of that other's brother in yibum, and the brother of that second one who performed chalitza may take the chalitza of that other's brother in yibum. If the two brothers perform chalitza with both wives before consulting the court, the two brothers of the second man may not take the sisters in yibum, lest one marry the sister of a woman with whom he had his own levirate bond. Rather, one performs chalitza, and the other brother may perform yibum if he desires. And if they married their wives before consulting the court does not remove them from the marriage. That's Mishnah number 5. Learn from here, says the Gemara, learn from here in the Mishnah that betrothals that cannot ultimately lead to consummation are nevertheless betrothals. Right? So there was if there's a betrothal that can't lead to a consummation, like a priest betroths a divorced woman, they're not allowed to get married. but they performed that betrothal, so it's going to require a get. You might have thought that since he's not allowed to marry her, the betrothal was meaningless. No, the betrothal has substance. They're not allowed to finish the job and get married, but they must give a bill of divorce before they part company. So there is a dispute between Abaye and Rava in Tractate Kiddushin with regard to a case of a betrothal that, due to some halachic complication, can never be consummated. The cases in this Mishnah may not be consummated, since each of the two sisters is forbidden due to the uncertainty as to whether she is the woman he betrothed or the sister of the woman he betrothed. Therefore, both are forbidden to him. Nevertheless, the Mishnah instructs that he must give a bill of divorce to both of them. And this implies that such betrothals are valid, even though they cannot be consummated. In contrast to Rava's opinion that betrothals that cannot ultimately be consummated are not betrothals at all, and therefore you wouldn't need a bill of divorce, you could just walk away. Generally speaking, in disputes between Abaye and Rava, the law follows Rava. There are 6 exceptions to that when the law follows Abaye, and this is one of them. The Gemara rejects this. With what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case when at first both sisters were recognized, and at the moment of betrothal, he knew whom he betrothed, right? So the confusion came later. At the moment of betrothal, everyone knew who was getting betrothed. So the betrothal was valid. There's no reason to invalidate it. They just can't consummate the marriage based on that betrothal because they're not sure who was betrothed. But the betrothal itself, there was nothing wrong with it. They knew who was getting betrothed, and therefore it's a valid betrothal. But later, the two sisters were mixed up so that he was no longer certain which one he had betrothed. If so, there was not any flaw in the betrothal itself initially. And the language of the Mishnah is also precise, as it teaches, and he does not know which of them he betrothed. But it does not teach it is unknown completely. And this implies that the matter was known initially and then was later mixed up. And the Gemara adds, conclude from here that this is the case. The Gemara asks, if so, what is the Mishnah teaching us in this segment of the Mishnah referring to the giving of 2 bills of divorce? That is obvious. The Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach the last clause of the Mishnah. As there it teaches, if he died and he had one brother, the brother performs chalitza with both of them. If he had 2 brothers, one performs chalitza and the other one enters into yibum if he desires. Specifically, one brother must perform chalitza first. And only subsequently, the other brother may perform yibum. Right? Why? Because they're not sure which one was betrothed and which one was not betrothed. If he performs chalitza with one of them, so if she was the one that was betrothed, now she's free. If she was not the one betrothed, then it's a meaningless chalitza. But in either case, now the other brother can come and either marry the girl, because she was never bound in any way, or marry her because the first one was freed through chalitza and now she's free. Or this one was freed through chalitza and now she's free. And the Mishnah says, in the case of 2 unrelated men who betrothed 2 sisters, if this one does not know which sister he betrothed, and that one does not know which sister he betrothed, this one gives 2 bills of divorce, one to each of the women, and that one gives 2 bills of divorce. And the Gemara asks, learn from here that betrothals that cannot ultimately lead to consummation are valid betrothals. And the Gemara rejects this. Here too, this is referring to a case where they were recognized and later mixed up. And the language is also precise as it teaches, and he does not know, meaning that he does not know now whom he betrothed. And it does not teach it is unknown. And the Gemara summarizes, indeed conclude this from here, that this is the case. In other words, if the betrothal included uncertainty from the beginning, it was vague, it was, it was never clearly specified who got betrothed, then you could say that betrothal was invalid from the start and wouldn't trigger these requirements of giving bills of divorce or chalitza, etc. There was no betrothal because it was ambiguous who got betrothed. But in the cases we're discussing, there was a clear betrothal and the mix-up came later. Now the Gemara asks, if so, what does it come to teach us in relating that both of them must give bills of divorce? And the Gemara explains it was necessary to teach the last clause where it says if they died and this one had one brother and this one had two, the single brother performs chalitza with both of them, and of the two, one performs chalitza and the other one enters in levirate marriage if he so desires. That needed to be taught. And the Gemara asks, that is obvious, as this is identical to the law taught in the first clause of the Mishnah. Why should this case be different from the previous case of two brothers and two sisters? And the Gemara answers, it is necessary to teach this case of the two unrelated men who betrothed two sisters, even after teaching two brothers who engaged two sisters. Why? It is necessary to teach this lest you say the sages should issue a decree in the case of two brothers due to the case of one brother. In a case of one brother, he may only perform chalitza, but may not enter into yibum. Without this Mishnah, one may have thought that the same should hold true for two brothers. And the Mishnah comes to teach us that they did not issue such a decree. And if there are two brothers, one can clear the way by performing chalitza, and now the other one has the possibility to perform yibum. And this is specifically if the brother of one man first performs chalitza, and afterward the brother of the other man consummates the levirate marriage. But if he consummated the yibum first, then no, that is prohibited. And why? Why is that? He might be encountering the prohibition of a Yevama to a member of the public. Meaning, possibly the woman he married was not his Yevama, but someone else's Yevama. And until the other man's brother performs chalitza with her, she is still forbidden to all other men. And I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. The Mishnah taught, if this one had two brothers and that one had two brothers, the brother of this one who performed chalitza may take the chalutza of the other brother in yibum, and the brother of that second one who performed chalitza may take the chalutza of that other brother's in yibum. And the Gemara asks, why do I need this as well? This clause is identical to that previous law. And the Gemara answers, it is necessary, lest you say, let the sages issue another decree, lest he consummate the yibum without the other first performing chalitza at all. And this comes to teach us that such a decree is not issued. Rather, one of each pair of brothers can enter yibum. And the Gemara asks, in what way is this case different from that which we learned in a Mishnah on page 26a? That's our next Mishnah coming up. If there were 4 brothers, and 2 of them were married to 2 sisters, and those married to the sisters died, and then those 2 sisters perform chalitza, but may not enter into yibum with the remaining brothers, since each woman is the sister of a woman with a levirate bond to each of the brothers. Why not say here as well that each is the sister of a woman with a levirate bond, and no yibum is possible? It's chalitza, period. And the Gemara rejects this. How can these cases be compared? There in that Mishnah, if it is according to the one who said that the levirate bond is substantial, just the fact that Yevama comes before a Yavam, there is some kind of a bond there. And then if she has a co-wife, the co-wife is exempt because of this bond. If it is according to the one who said that the levirate bond is substantial, then there is a bond in that case, as 2 sisters were certainly married to the brothers and require levirate marriage. And if it is according to the one who said that it is prohibited to nullify the levirate mitzvah through marrying the sister of the Yevama, then the explanation of that Mishnah is that it is prohibited to nullify the levirate mitzvah, and for this reason they must perform chalitza and may not enter into levirate marriage. However, here, in this Mishnah, there is uncertainty concerning the betrothal, such that, with regard to each one of the brothers, one could say that possibly he encountered his own Yevama, or possibly he did not. And perhaps each brother took his own brother's wife in levirate marriage, and for this reason, the sages did not issue a decree. Okay, let's see if there's any comments or questions on this very straightforward teaching. Okay. Here we go. Questions on Yevamos 23. Okay. Regarding what I was talking about at the beginning of class about emunah, having faith, and how my friend Joel is such an incredible exemplar of living in faith even after losing his wife in a tragic accident. Sharon comments, I have been struggling with this idea of divine intervention right now. As I watch the news, I see the people of Przemysl, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but of Przemysl, Poland, supporting Ukrainian refugees when in 1939, they let my uncle die at the hands of the Nazis in the ghetto in that same location. Did they do teshuvah to do this now? Or did Jewish lives not matter then? That's a deep question. It's so interesting, right? The people who needed to do teshuvah are probably dead. The people that could have saved Jews back in 1939, they're probably no longer in the world. Maybe, somebody who's in a position to save someone when he was, 18 is still alive now. But, so do we ascribe guilt to the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of people who as a group committed a great sin in the past? Often we will do that. Maybe we're wrong to do it. But we'll just say, those people are terrible and they probably educated their children to be just as bad. On the other hand, sometimes populations take measures to overcome the horrific actions that one generation did so that it should never happen again. And you definitely see education efforts in Germany and Poland. I don't know what they've done in Ukraine. Because I can tell you, I am a descendant of Ukrainians. We left Ukraine in 1905, but the pogroms that led to that were horrific attacks on Jews, and my family was not very fond of the Ukrainians, at least of that time. So I don't know. Hopefully the Ukrainians have educated their children not to, but I mean, the ones who committed the pogroms in late 1800s, early 1900s, also were merciless in handing over Jews to Nazis and participating in the Holocaust of killing Jews in World War II. Did they educate their children after that? I mean, they do have a Jewish president now, so it makes one wonder. But what you're asking, Sharon, is a very deep question, and it's one that requires, I think, a lot of thought and experience and, sometimes a wait and see attitude. But at least, at the bottom line, innocent lives are being saved. Okay, so thank God innocent lives are being saved from this horrific war that's going on now. And Tom, I'm afraid I can't believe in it. If I'm wrong, then God should level with us. Even faith deserves some assurance. I mean, it's interesting, right, when we're talking about divine providence, right, hashgacha pratis, and sort of God, teasing his hand, right, showing his hand a little bit when amazing coincidences happen that lead to wonderful results and lives are saved or people are cured or, a tremendous learning happens that branches out and touches many other people. So God is tipping his hand a little bit, right? So why wouldn't God tip his hand in other cases? But if God always tipped his hand, then this world would fail in one of its major purposes, which is this world is a place where God's presence is hidden, right? Connecting with God requires faith by design, because if God's hand were openly revealed, then free will would mean something completely different. Right? Because if God's hand was always revealed and justice was always measured out according to our actions, it would be a completely different world. People wouldn't really have a choice because anytime they committed a sin, they'd be struck by lightning, they'd be gone. Who would sin in such a world? This is a place where we can make our own choices, and many people will fail in making proper moral choices, and a lot of suffering will ensue at the hands of other humans. And, when I talk to my father, he has a very tough time with this. My mom's in a memory care facility. My father has many tragedies in his life, and he finds it very challenging to his faith to believe that God would allow this kind of thing. And for others, despite those kinds of tragedies, they cling to their faith. It's a very personal issue, and I don't think you can tell anyone else how to feel or what they should or shouldn't say or do or believe. but I think that in our own journeys, we probably wrestle, with these questions, and sometimes our faith is stronger and sometimes not quite as strong. And I think, when Joel shares with me what he's going through and what's giving him strength, it really inspires me. And when something gives me strength, I try to share that with you. And so I think that this sharing of what strengthens our faith helps others. And finally, Sharon, twice does the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, mention a loved and a hated wife that do not fit that description. Jacob with Leah and Rachel, and Elkanah with Hannah and Penina, right? So interesting. And probably another, really good reminder of don't speak Lashon Hara. Don't enter into discussions about other people and what's going on in their world and their union and their relationships. A lot of people are doing that right now about a celebrity couple, and that's all Lashon Hara, and it's wrong. Don't judge a book by its cover. The simplest teaching, we all learned in first grade, but is kind of always borne out that the situation is more complicated than we could ever imagine from the outside. And that's a good reminder from those two stories in the Torah. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together for the Friday class at the regular noon Pacific time of the Friday class tomorrow. Have a great night.